The Bigfoot Mother's Plea. A man faced the choice of his life. The late afternoon sun shattered through the trees like broken glass, scattering shards of light across the moss. I moved the way I always do, steady, practiced reading the forest like a second language. Every twig, every shadow spoke, and then silence. The chickadees cut off mid-song. The woodpecker's tapping ceased. Even the wind folded into itself as though the whole valley held its breath. That was when I heard it. A sound low and ragged, not quite a growl, not quite a cry. It carried pain, but also a plea, like a cello struck with a trembling hand. Every story I'd ever heard about these woods rushed back in a single shiver. Warnings whispered around campfires, old men muttering. You never know when fog banked low. Still, my first thought was simple. Someone is hurt. I slipped the rope from my shoulder, raised my palm toward the hush, and stepped forward. And then she appeared, towering between two firs so tall they pinched the sky. Her shape froze my breath. Shoulders broad as boulders, arms corded with mountain strength, fur dark as wet bark steaming where sunlight touched. Eyes amber deep alive, locked on mine. The myth, the legend, Bigfoot. But she did not come to vanish. She stepped fully into the light, both hands lifted, not in threat but in surrender, in plea. And with the sweep of her arm, she pointed toward a gash in the earth where a child's cry clawed at the air. At that moment, I stood before the impossible. Run or descend into the unknown. And the choice I made would change everything. Before the tale begins, comment your city below. And when it ends, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Part 1. The choice that changed everything. The sound came again. Thin trembling rising from somewhere beneath the earth. It wasn't the call of a bird or the groan of a wounded bear. No, this was different. It carried panic sharp as broken glass, but threaded with something else. Something human-like. A cry for help. The giant figure before me, her shoulders broad as tree trunks, her breath steaming in the shaft of late sunlight, pointed once more toward the dark pit in the ground. Her whole arm moved like the sweep of a compass needle. And then, pressing her massive hand against her chest, she looked at me. Her eyes, amber molten alive, were not the eyes of a predator. They were the eyes of a mother. I felt my stomach knot. For years I had trained my instincts to listen to the forest, to weigh risk against survival. And in this moment, every muscle screamed the same answer: run. But the cry from below cut through all of that. High, ragged, fragile, the cry of a child. My knees bent without thinking. My hand slid to the rope slung across my shoulder. Breath steady, heart pounding. I raised my palm, the oldest gesture of peace a human being knows, and whispered into the silence, I'll try. Did she understand the words? Maybe not, but she understood the choice. For a heartbeat, the immense muscles in her frame seemed to loosen. Her heavy chest rose and fell with something that looked like relief. And then she stepped aside, clearing the way as though granting me passage into her world. I swallowed hard. The forest around us was so still it felt like a cathedral. The silence wasn't empty, it was listening, witnessing. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. I could see the pit now. A jagged mouth in the earth rimmed with roots, slick from last week's rain. The edges sloped inward, dark and treacherous. From below came that high, frantic cry again, each note vibrating my ribs. I crouched low, peering in. My breath caught. A child's small trembling, clutching its own fur with tiny hands pressed against the far wall. Eyes wide-mouthed, hiccuping sobs, the little one stared up at the circle of light above. The resemblance was undeniable, the same broad mouth, the same heavy brow, all rendered in miniature. I had rescued men from gullies before. I had lowered myself into canyons after storms. But nothing had prepared me for this, for the sight of a myth made flesh, and its child helpless and afraid. Behind me, the mother made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a roar, wasn't a threat. It was low, guttural, and yet laced with something heartbreakingly familiar, terror pleading hope, the sound of a parent desperate for her child. And in that moment, the weight of choice crushed me. Turn away and I would live, but I would also carry the memory of that cry forever. Step forward, and I risked everything, but maybe I could save a life. I closed my eyes. In the stillness, I heard my own voice again, steady, anchoring me. I'll try. I dropped my pack. The rope coiled loose at my feet. My fingers moved without hesitation, knotting in practiced rhythm, muscle memory taking over where fear might have frozen me. The rope rasped over stone loud in the hush. The mother flinched, then stilled when I lifted my hand in reassurance. The forest around us leaned closer as though holding its breath for what would come next. Man and myth stood side by side, united not by fear, but by something older, deeper, the cry of a child. And with that, the choice was made. Part 2. Bridge of Trust. The rope hissed against the bark as I anchored it around the roots of an old cedar. My hands moved quick, precise, wrapping, knotting, testing each pull until I felt the weight hold. Years of wilderness training had prepared me for many descents, but never for this one. Behind me, the mother watched every movement. Her chest rose and fell like the swell of a storm tide, her hands clenching, unclenching claws scoring the earth. She could have torn the tree from its roots if she wished. Yet she stood still, silent, trembling, waiting. I risked a glance back at her. Her eyes, those amber pools, never left me. In them was fear, but not of me. Fear for the small life crying in the pit. A fear I had seen before in the eyes of human parents who had nearly lost their children. Slowly I lifted both palms again. "It's all right," I whispered, voice low, steady. "I'm here." She made a sound then deep in her chest that vibrated the air. Not a growl, not a warning, something closer to a prayer. The rope slid through my device with a soft friction song. I leaned back, boots edging toward the rim. The air inside the hole was colder, damp with the scent of wet earth and rot. As I descended, the sunlight narrowed above me, shrinking to a circle of pale fire rimmed by the giant silhouette of the mother. The cub's cries wavered, thin and panicked. "Easy now," I murmured, forcing calm into every syllable. "I've got you." When my boots found a ledge of clay, I stopped. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. The little one huddled in the far corner, arms wrapped around itself, trembling. Its breaths came fast, shallow, like a bird trapped in a hand. I kept my hands, low palms open, never making sudden moves. I'd learned long ago that eye contact was a question prey did not want to answer. So instead, I softened my gaze, letting the child choose if it would look at me. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the cub blinked, eyes wide wet, and tilted its head. Curiosity flickered against fear. Above, the mother shifted. A clump of soil rained down beside me as she clawed the edge in desperation. The sound jolted the cub, and it pressed tighter against the wall, whimpering. I raised my hand toward the rim. "Wait. Please." The words meant nothing in language, but perhaps everything in tone, because she froze, chest-heaving claws loosening from the soil. The trust between us was fragile, thin as the rope itself, but it held. I drew out a soft sling cord from my kit, widening it with both hands. "This is your belt," I murmured, though I knew the child didn't understand. "We're going up, safe, together." The cub sniffed the air body, swaying with indecision. For a moment, I thought it would retreat, curl back into fear. But then trust leaped. Tiny hands reached forward. My throat tightened as I slipped the loop gently under its arms. It whimpered, pitched high, but then stilled, eyes darting upward to the shaft of light where its mother waited. Above me, the mother made a sound so raw, so layered with hope and terror, it carved itself into my marrow forever. Gratitude braided through panic. I tugged the rope, twice signal ready. The line drew taut. Clay crumbled from the walls as weight shifted. My arms braced, my boots pressed against slick earth. Slowly, slowly we rose. The cub's legs bicycled in air dirt raining around us. My shoulders burned, my grip ached, but nothing mattered except this. The small life in my hands was climbing back toward the light. Part 3. The moment of trust. The rim of the pit widened above like an eye opening to the sky. My muscles screamed, but I kept lifting, guiding, steadying. The cub whimpered once, then quieted as though it too understood that the worst was ending. And then a shadow fell across us. The mother's massive hand reached down, bigger than my chest, fingers ridged with power that could have crushed stone, yet moving with a gentleness that made my throat ache. She cradled her child the way any mother would human myth or deer in a thicket. The cub collapsed against her chest, burying its face in the thick fur, releasing a shuddering sob that broke into hiccuped breaths of relief. I stayed below chest heaving, letting the adrenaline drain out of me. My head bowed not in worship, but in sheer exhaustion. My body trembled from the climb, from the weight, from the enormity of what had just happened. When I finally pulled myself up and out, the sun struck me full in the face. Cool air rushed over my neck. I blinked, and there we were, three beings standing in a circle of breath, each checking the other for harm, as if we had known each other all our lives. The mother crouched, lowering herself until her amber eyes met mine. Up close, I saw the details that made her real burrs tangled in her forearm, dirt smeared across her cheek, a cut beating along her knuckle marks of desperation from clawing at the earth to reach her child. Her gaze locked onto me, slow, unwavering, searching, and then her hand rose. I stiffened, but when it touched my shoulder, my breath caught. Warm, dry, surprisingly soft, like a well-worn leather jacket that has weathered storms, yet carried the shape of a body faithfully. It was not the touch of a wild beast. It was gratitude. I have been thanked in many ways in the backcountry. A hunter once pressed a folded bill into my palm, relief shaking his hands. A lost boy once clung to my waist, sobbing until his mother came crashing down a gravel slope. But this was different. I had never been thanked by the wild itself. Something larger than language had reached across the chasm between worlds and whispered, "You belong here, whether or not you ever claim it." The cub peeked out from its mother's fur, then wide eyes, still wet, still too large for its face. I knelt without thinking, sliding my pack forward, fishing out the collapsible cup. A little water tipped in. I held it low. The cub sniffed, hesitated, then lapped in quick bird-like sips. The mother watched with unblinking focus, her whole body taut. But when the cup emptied, she made a low sound that felt like approval. We stayed like that longer than I ever expected. 3 lives breathing in rhythm, the forest slowly returning its sounds. A bird call here, the knock of a woodpecker there. For the first time in years, I felt something ease inside me, as though I had lowered more than just a rope into that pit, as though I had pulled something back up for myself too. Trust. Part 4. The bittersweet. Goodbye. The forest was still holding its breath when the moment broke. It did not shatter, it shifted gently like a tide pulling back. The mother rose in one long fluid motion, lifting her child against her chest. The cub's tiny arms clung tight, its face pressed into the thick fur, breathing in safety, as though it would never let go again. She turned toward the tree line. The undergrowth seemed to part for her, vines, loosening, ferns bowing, as if the wilderness itself cleared a path for its guardian. But before she stepped into shadow, she turned back. Her amber eyes found mine, burning, steady, memorizing me, or blessing me, or perhaps simply checking. The strange biped who descended into the dark for my child. Is he still here? Still breathing? For a long moment, we stared at each other across the hush. No words, no language. Only the weight of gratitude, heavy as stone yet lighter than air. Then she tilted her head back and released a sound I will hear in my bones until the day I die. It began low, rising as though scaling the very ribs of the earth. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It rolled through the clearing like a benediction, settling into every branch and every stone, and far away, so faint I wondered if it was only my imagination. Another voice answered, distant, like a bell across water. The cub stirred at the sound, letting out a tiny trill echoing its mother's call. She shifted it higher on her hip, the most human gesture I had ever seen, and then she was gone. The forest swallowed her whole. The ferns closed the shadows sealed, leaving only the afterimage you get when you stare too long at the sun. I stood alone, rope slung over my shoulder cup dangling from my fingers. My cheeks ached from smiling at nothing, at everything. In that emptiness I felt a strange ache, a loss though nothing had been taken from me, because I knew this was not my world. I had been permitted to enter, to touch it, to carry a piece of it in my chest. But the wild always takes back its own, and that perhaps is the truest form of love, to let go. Part. Echoes in the silence. The silence after they vanished was not empty. It was full of breath, of memory, of something that lingered like smoke after fire. I stood there, rope over my shoulder, my boots sunk in moss, my fingers still trembling with the ghost of her touch. The forest, once hushed in fear, began to breathe again. The woodpecker tapped once more. A squirrel scolded from above, bold, now that the giants had gone. Even the wind slipped back between the trees like an old friend. But nothing was the same. When I hiked back, my pack felt lighter, though its weight had not changed. Because the burden I had carried, the burden of distance, of disbelief, had been set down where it belonged. In the doing, not the telling. At the trailhead, I watched people argue about dog booties, children lick condensation off bottles, men curse gravel in their shoes. The ordinary world rushed back with almost comical speed. But I carried a secret the world could never pin to a page. That night when I rinsed my gear, the rope still smelled of earth and clay. My skin still remembered the warmth of her hand, and on my map I drew a circle. Small, precise, no label, because the place already knew its own name. I told one friend, Paul, the only man who knows how to let silence sit without thinking the line has dropped. Saw a thing I texted. He called it once. I told him enough to make it true, but left out the parts that would sound like a lie, even though they were the most faithful. "You going back?" he asked. I looked at my hands, still lined with clay beneath the nails, and whispered, "I don't know, but I did." Days later, I returned, pack heavier this time, not with fear, but with gifts. Dried fruit, a little more water, a knife I swore would never harm. And there they were, half in shadow, half in sun. The cub peeked shyly from behind its mother's leg eyes, curious, now not terrified. I set the offering on a stump and stepped back, leaving space. The cub toddled out, snatched it, chewed with earnest concentration, and bolted back to safety. The mother's gaze met mine once again. No words, no gestures, only recognition. The world had shifted. The map of my life was truer now and wonderfully wrong. Because somewhere in these woods a bond had been carved between man and myth, sealed by rope, by trust, by love. And I knew this. When the forest hushes again, when the air tightens like the inside of a held breath, I will follow. Not for proof, not for pride, but because somewhere a life may need lifting, and I have rope. The rope between worlds. In the fiercest silence of the forest, I learned a truth older than any myth, that compassion can cross boundaries no map dares to mark. I thought I had lowered a rope to save a life. But the truth is, the rope saved me too. It bound two worlds for a single moment, and in that fragile moment I remembered, in storms, in fear, in the darkest pits, only kindness keeps us alive. The mother and child are gone now, their footprints swallowed by moss and time. But their presence remains in every hush of wind, in every circle I draw on my map, in the trust that still lingers in my chest. And if you believe in the miracle of mercy, if you believe that one act of compassion can change everything, then share this story. Let the world remember that even in the wildest dark, there are hands willing to reach down and lift another life up. Comment the city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Bigfoot Tales, because the next story may change the way you see the world.